Welcome into another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. It is a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition. I am your host, Benjamin Wolk. I'm here with Jordan Hill, and it really feels like we're in the recruiting season. Recruiting's getting hot and heavy. Georgia's adding some big time commitment since our last Stay Wolk episode. They've missed on some big guys. People are really happy online. People are really mad online. We've got official visits coming up with Scavenger Hunt weekend. If Jordan's lucky, I might go on a rant or two, depending on how things go. So we'll see there. But we'll, as always, we'll have predict a commit. We'll have arrow pointing up. We will be guestless this week just because there's so much for us to cover in terms of guys that have committed, guys that haven't, what's coming up on the calendar. And so we really want to get into all of that. But I want to start with some of the news that's happened over the last few weeks. And Jordan, you think we should start with the good or start with the bad?
Start with the bad, baby. That's what's got the junkyard, keeping the junkyard up at night. We gotta just tackle it, just get into it.
Well, on the bright side, we have a lot more good news to talk about than bad news. And so despite some of the emotions running high around the junkyard these days, really there's only been one piece of negative recruiting news that's come out for Georgia this month that has been by and large a really positive news month for Georgia. But on Tuesday evening, 5-star offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell committed to Miami over Georgia. And as we've talked about on this show, we'll get into predict to commit stuff later in the show. I had him on my predict to commit. I placed a crystal ball for him. He was in my mock classes. This was someone that was at the top of Georgia's recruiting board. Before we get into the recruitment itself or how it happened or why it happened or some of the details within it, it's a recruiting loss for Georgia. There's no other way to put it than this was Georgia's gem in the 2026 recruiting class at offensive tackle. I did my VIP piece at Dogs 24/7 after the fact that was like, where does Georgia turn on the offensive line? And Georgia has some great pieces, especially on the interior offensive line that they're looking at this year. But this isn't a situation where Georgia is just going to be able to turn and find a Jackson Cantwell replacement answer, because that doesn't exist. And that's why Georgia put as much time and energy into this recruitment. That's why Georgia, we'll get into the financial side of it a little bit, but why Georgia was willing to go to certain lengths that it ordinarily would not feel comfortable going, because that's how they feel about Jackson Cantwell. That's where he sits on their recruiting board as a prospect. And again, the positional value of being an offensive tackle means a lot here. Before I get into some of the details, though, Jordan, you tell me, why do you think 5-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell chose Miami over Georgia?
Coral Gables probably just felt like home, Ben. I can't think of anything other than that. That's playing for the U, baby. It may not be 2001 anymore, but sometimes playing for the U just sells itself.
It's one of those things where no matter what you say after a decision like this, somebody's going to be pissed at you for how you're contextualizing the situation, right? So if you sit here and say he chose Miami simply because of the money, and I'll get into some of that because I know that a lot of people want to hear about that, and that's the way of the world nowadays, so I get it. If you sit here and say it's all about money, there's going to be a lot of people insinuating that you're slighting Miami, or you're slighting what their coaching staff have done in terms of building relationships, or you're simplifying the recruitment, or you're, not acknowledging, selling points that another school has. If I sit here and say all the reasons why I think that Miami has some selling points that are in their favor and that money wasn't the only reason, other people are going to be pissed at me for not just saying it's all about money. And so what I choose to do is just piss everybody off and say that I think that both of these things are completely true. And I think that we can live in a world where both of these things are completely true. And I'll address the counters in a second, because I know exactly what the counters are. But let me start with, and this is the part where most of the people listening to this are Georgia fans, and they're not going to be as receptive to this part of the conversation, but it is something that I do believe to be true. Jackson Cantwell has incredible relationships with Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, the head coach and offensive line coach at Miami. To diminish that and say that none of that matters in modern day recruiting would be dishonest. Those things still do matter. To what extent do they matter? How much those things can be impacted by financial factors. That's another conversation, and it is a sliding scale that does not apply one for every recruit. Every recruit is going to view that entire spectrum completely differently. But the reality is there were strong relationships there, and I have been a supporter of Stacey Searles. I think that Stacey Searles has earned the right to have this 2025 season. But anybody in the Georgia sphere that hasn't acted as though there, or isn't acting as though there hasn't been backlash towards Stacey Searles after the last season and questions about what the future of Georgia's offensive line and recruiting is going to look like, again, that is also being dishonest. So I think that you can fairly look at selling points that Miami has, especially the Cristobal Mirabal relationship and what they've done with offensive linemen. They've got, Big Francis there right now that I think is going to be a first round pick next year. They just had the number 1 overall pick. They've been aggressive with quarterback transfer portal recruiting. I think that people enjoy being down in Coral Gables and living in Florida. And so there are people that are going to be recruited by all of these top schools and see legitimate reasons why they want to go play for Miami, specifically as an offensive lineman right now. And so I don't want to discount any of that when I talk about the other piece of this, because yes, obviously money is going to be involved in this. His agent's Drew Rosenhaus. We've known for months that his agent was Drew Rosenhaus. It's not a news flash on May 13th. All of a sudden, money was going to be a factor in this recruitment. I also think Drew Rosenhaus is great at his job, and he knows how to get his clients the best that they can get. And I'm sure that that was involved in some of the decisions that were being made along the way in terms of taking visits to Oregon, taking visits to Georgia, maybe knowing that Miami was the place that it was going to be, but trying to either find reasons why other places made more sense or, trying to get the best deal that you can get for your client from Miami, the school that he was going to end up choosing. And so, yes, what I'm not going to do is sit here and throw out dollar figures. I've seen people say 2 million, 2.5 million. I've heard rumors and speculation as well. What I always want to say on this is a lot of times the numbers that I am hearing are coming from a place of bias. It's not something I want numbers to come out and come off as sour grapes. I heard, can't remember if I ever said it on this show or not, but I heard 2, months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, about a conversation that Georgia had with Cantwell's representatives and a 3-year big, 7-figure contract that made a lot of people uncomfortable and almost saying I don't think that Georgia is going to be able to get to that. With all of that said, Georgia's still hosting him on a visit right before he visits. Georgia's still feeling like they've got a legitimate shot to be able to get him right there at the end. So clearly Georgia was getting financially involved in this recruitment. Can I say that they were financially involved as Miami? No, I can't. Based on the rumors that I've been hearing, I think year 1 especially, but over the term of the entire contract, yeah, Miami was offering more money. And I think that it's possible for both of those things to have been true. It's possible for Jackson Cantwell to have come to the decision that he would love to play at Miami. And it's one of the options that he would be more than willing to play at, and he would love living there and being in school there and love developing underneath 2 guys that I think he genuinely believes will get him prepared to be an NFL offensive tackle. And it's also possible that that school was the school that gave him the most money. And I think what people want you to do is say, well, if money was equal, where would he have gone? Or, if that's the one that really gets me, because it's like, okay, well, they weren't the same. Georgia made a conscious decision that they were only willing to go to a certain level in that recruitment. Miami, for one reason or another, depth chart, where they're at as in a program arc, the importance of having an offensive lineman to Mario Cristobal. Like, there are plenty of reasons I'm sure that could have factored in that made Miami see a higher value in Jackson Cantwell, especially guaranteed in year one, than Georgia did. And so because of that, yes, there were financial factors that pointed in Miami's favor. There will be people that will get mad at me for saying that. There will be people that will get mad at me for saying that Miami has factors of why an offensive lineman would want to choose there that have no money involved. So I think that there were many, many new age reasons why he committed to Miami, and also some old school ones as well. Am I crazy, Jordan, or was it just money?
Well, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. You could be right on this and still be crazy, Ben. But no, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the thing to me, like, it's disingenuous to not talk about the money because that's just silly. And I think we've gotten to a point in covering recruiting, not just us, just sports media in general, where we don't do the, well, you know, it felt like home for you. Like, we know that that's a part of it, but I think you look at Alex Mirabal, you look at Mario Cristobal, who played at Miami, who has an experience as an offensive line coach. Like, I can see the appeal of going there. Shout out to Dog Nation's Jeff Centel, who was at Jackson's commitment. He did ask about the NIL contract, and Jackson Cantwell said that his contract was confidential. So shout out to Jeff for asking, because that is the question, you know, everybody wants to know. But no, it's one of those situations. You can see how this played out. It is funny to me to see blowback towards Stacey Searles, toward Georgia. I mean, I think they did what they were comfortable doing. And I don't think they were going to put themselves in a position where they got the guy and then they're taking the weeks after that or the months after and saying, okay, was that really worth it? And even to go back to the Jackson Cantwell piece of this, we talked about this some with folks on the Junkyard. We're like, I understand it if the money was a big part of the equation. I know I feel comfortable saying that wasn't the only part of the equation, but if you're offering that kind of money, look, none of us have a crystal ball and can tell you what Jackson Cantwell is going to do in college. He could get hurt and never quite live up to his potential. I'm never going to fault a kid for if he gets an opportunity financially that just totally overshadows his other options, for him to take that. And that's the thing too. I try to keep in mind, I understand fans are frustrated. We saw so much on our message board about, you know, I don't even want to follow recruiting anymore. God forbid Georgia missed out on a recruit. That was the first time that had ever happened. But, you know, I look at it too, like things we've run into in our professions where you get an opportunity where you can make more money, and a lot of the time you wind up going. That you know, doesn't speak ill of that other option you had. It's just part of the equation you have to take into account. And again, I understand the frustration, and a lot of us thought that it was going to be Georgia, and, you know, it didn't play out that way. And now Jackson Cantwell's set to go to Miami.
That was a good aside too, because I was going to get into one of the pet peeves of mine. Like, it is such a pet peeve of mine that whenever Georgia doesn't get it, again, on May 5th, when Georgia got Jared Curtis, nobody was talking about how sad a state of affairs college football recruiting was, right? Like, it was
well, we weren't on the Oregon board, so we can't say that.
I'm sure there were people talking about it being a sad state of affairs over there. There's no question about it. But on May 13th, all of a sudden, it's a sad state of affairs. And I think my big pet peeve that I'm dealing with right now is people that love to go out of their way to go to a keyboard to tell everybody else about how much they definitely don't care as much about college football because of the way some of these things are going. And I'm not saying that there aren't certain things that are making people desensitized to college football and some of the things around it. I get it. People still care about this stuff. And the people that are going and telling you how much they don't care about this stuff are the people that care the most about it. Because, look, you're still dialed in on Jackson Cantwell's commitment. Like, anybody who's acting like they weren't is lying, because that's why they're so mad about it. That's why people are so worked up about the reasoning. And again, I think what people want when they miss out on a recruit is to have coping mechanisms for why it's not that big of a deal to them, why they're not emotionally invested in this, or why it didn't hurt them. The decision was made. Like, just be real about it. You wanted Jackson Cantwell to be on Georgia's football team. Now, when you start to factor in the money side of it, and we've talked, I think, more than just about anybody in this space about the salary cap and what Georgia's going to be utilizing and how you have to be thinking about this in the house settlement world now. And I get it. There's still going to be people out there saying the house settlement's not going to work. It's whatever. I've talked to enough people that are operating within this world that believe that this is how everyone nationally is operating, that if Georgia decides they have now used too high a percentage of their salary cap on a certain guy and they don't want to go beyond that, when you miss on that guy, you can live with that decision because you were making that conscious decision to say, all right, this is how far we were willing to go for this player. And when you don't get that guy, it now frees up a lot of space for you to be able to use on other offensive linemen or to lure in some of your more elite prospects and those types of things. But that was just a quick aside on it. It just peeves me that everyone wants to act. And they only tell you this when something negative happens and they want to feel as though they don't care that much. Oh, I don't care that much. It's like, yes, you do. Or you wouldn't be telling everybody about how much you don't care.
My thing is hearing that, seeing that on our board, it made me think of the Bill Self quote where he said winning becomes a relief and losing is a disaster. And that's just no way to follow college football. And again, as people very wisely pointed out on our board, people are going to bellyache right now, and then more than likely, Georgia's still going to sign a top 5 class. This is not reason to jump off, a bridge and say that, it's disaster. You swung and missed at the top offensive tackle in the country. You're going to swing and miss on a few other guys over the course of this 2026 class.
Yeah, and Georgia has a couple of their offensive linemen. I mean, they'll try and swing big for some guys that they consider elite guys, like Kenny Pepe that just committed to USC, like Malachi Lee from Hawaii that Stacey Searles has gone out to see. An in-state guy that I think becomes more of a guy to find a way to get him, and I like Georgia's chances of getting him now, is Jared Smith, who's on your predicted commit team. Like, I think that this decision is good news probably for both Georgia and him in terms of that commitment happening. And so, you've got other guys, Ekene Egboko, Alabama commit Chris Booker, Tyler Chuckium from in-state. Like, there are other offensive tackles now that Georgia is going to have to fully evaluate, decide who the right best fits are. But I mean, again, you're not going to have a 1-for-1 Jackson Cantwell replacement. There's not other 6'8", 310-pound guys out there that are shot put champions and discus champions that, are these 5-star type guys. They don't exist that much. So Georgia will try. But I think it is going to be a piece together approach on the offensive line. And I still think that there's some good options out there. But like you said, Jordan, when we get to the end of this cycle, if you went back to every recruiting cycle since 2000, you would be able to point to a recruitment like Jackson Cantwell's where it's like, man, it felt like this was an elite guy that Georgia was going to be able to get. And for one reason or another, Georgia didn't end up getting them. You can point to it every single year, oftentimes multiple times a year, predating Kirby Smart, during Kirby Smart. Like, it's just the way that it's been. Now, the coping mechanisms that people use as to why people didn't choose Georgia are just different. The responses that you're hearing from people in terms of why you didn't get them. And I'm not saying that the coping mechanisms are invalid. I get, like, when you say, oh, you got a highest bid and you went to the highest bidder, there are examples where you are 100% accurate on that. And so I'm not denying that in any capacity. I'm just saying Georgia's probably going to sign another top 5 class, probably another top 3 class. And that doesn't come for free, but what it does come with is great talent evaluations and being wise with how you distribute the cap that you're going to have. And I think that I said this on our board. We're recording this on Wednesday. I said this on our board today. I think that Kirby Smart has a better pulse on how to navigate this era better than anyone. And people will get mad and say he needs to pivot. He needs to adapt. trust me, Kirby Smart is pivoting and adapting. I think he just very soundly believes in building an 85 or even 105 person roster. And to have that depth, you have to have, pieces of the pie for everyone. And if you overspend on an incoming offensive tackle that may not play in year one for you, you're really getting a little bit risky there. All right, enough of the bad, Jordan. Let's focus on the good. I think the place we got to start is 5-star quarterback Jared Curtis. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what we'll come up with to talk about. I mean, but this is why you're the host. I think you can come up with something.
All right. So May 5th, we've talked about it on a past Junkyard Dawgcast already, but now we've had some time to decompress on that. We've also seen it in the context of another decision. And so, I mean, we could have been sitting in a world where it's May 15th and Jackson Cantwell and Jared Curtis both did not commit to Georgia. That's not a world that I think any of us wanted to be living in for a whole host of different reasons.
Especially in any of us on the Junkyard. That would not have made for a fun May.
It would not have been. And, it's funny. I was giving myself a hard time for this yesterday about it. I'd been saying for several weeks now that I felt like just because of the way that I think salary cap works and finances work in this day and age, it was going to be really hard to get both Jared Curtis and Jackson Cantwell. And so I said, I feel like Georgia's going to end up going 1 for 2. I never had Jared in a mock class. I had Jackson in every mock class. I predicted Jackson. You had Jared on your team. I put in a crystal ball on Sunday after he was coming off the Georgia visit. I ended up being right that it was 1 for 2. I was just completely wrong on which one out of the two it is. But I think, when you think about, for a couple of things that I'm going to talk about here, I think it's important that this was the one that Georgia got in Jared Curtis. And I'll give a shout out to Jared Curtis, long deserved 5th star from our 24/7 sports scouting team. On Wednesday, we moved from 12 5-stars to 32 5-stars. He actually moved up from number 13 overall to number 9 overall. So even if we'd stayed at 12 5-stars, he would have, been in that 5-star category. We had the debate when he was committing on May 5th. Do we refer to him as a 5-star? What do we do? And I said, he's going to be a 5-star. And it's going to take less than 2 weeks for him to be a 5-star. Like, he's a 5-star on the composite. He's 13th. We always have 32 5-stars by the end of it. Like, he's going to be a 5-star. Let's just call him a 5-star. So it's not like he's new to being a 5-star in our minds, but officially it did happen this week. But I think this one was huge for many reasons. And I'm going to start with Georgia got their guy at quarterback. And I think that it was really important that when he committed to Georgia last March, and they said, all right, this is our guy, and then you go into October and he decommits, you're in a bad spot. Like, you are in all right, you've kind of put all your eggs in the Jared Curtis basket. You haven't really kicked the tires on a lot of other quarterback commits because you thought you had your guy in the class. And I think the fact that Georgia just went out and got the number 1 quarterback that they were focused on was really, really important, because we've seen it happen a couple of times where that hasn't happened, and it makes your quarterback room, look, there are unknowns around what the future of it is going to look like. Now, going back to what I said previously, I would always be in Kirby Smart's corner in terms of figuring it out. Like, they've done an unbelievable job of always having great quarterbacks for a quarterback conversation that's always been a little bit dicey, but it was a risk to go get their guy. The way that they had to recruit Jared, the way they had to understand you don't get recommitments very often in the recruiting world, and the fact that they had to take that risk to be able to get him, and they got their guy, huge, huge recruiting win for Georgia. And I think that the biggest kudos have to go out to Mike Bobo. I mean, it's been a tough offseason for conversation around Mike Bobo. Like, you can't even, like, there were moments in January and February where you couldn't even bring up his name on our board without people being instantly outraged about the fact that he was still Georgia's offensive coordinator, despite the fact, he was coming off 2023, one of the better point scoring seasons in Georgia history, and then an SEC championship. I realize I'm not disregarding the downturn that the offense took. But again, it's been a toxic conversational offseason around Mike Bobo, given what I feel his productivity has been since he's been as Georgia's offensive coordinator. Nobody that feels that way about Mike Bobo is going to let a recruitment get in the way of how they feel about him as a play caller or putting his players in the right position or how explosive the offense can be or how many points they can score, or whatever that is. The way that they feel about that is not going to change because he lands Jared Curtis. That said, I think everyone, even some of his biggest critics, were able to accept that Mike Bobo was, I don't want to say singularly responsible, but all the credit in this recruitment should go to Mike Bobo and the relationships that he was able to build with Jared Curtis. And yes, Jared Curtis also had a nice little, pretty lucrative QB1 future of the program contract that he got, especially after year one. I think that I keep saying the after year one part because I think that's important to Georgia in terms of not overspending on guys that might not be performing as freshmen, because as Kirby Smart has said to the media just this spring, like not everybody's Jeremiah Smith, not everybody is Ryan Williams. Everyone thinks that they can reclass or that they can play as freshmen. And it's just, those are few and far between. And I think that needs to be reflected in the financials of the contract. And I think that Georgia tries to do that as well, but shout out to Mike Bobo. Jordan, say something nice about Mike Bobo.
He gets way too much hate. There were people that were upset after the 2023 season. And, I mean, yeah, there were issues in 2024. But, again, it comes down to this for me with Mike Bobo. I truly, in my heart of hearts, think that if Kirby Smart did not think Mike Bobo was right for the job, he wouldn't have the job. And I think that, as close as those two are, I think Mike would understand that if a move was made. I think Kirby trusts him, and yeah, he does things sometimes that frustrate you, but there are a lot of games last year, Ben, where I went back. I always do that rewatch story a couple days after the game, and you could see why certain calls were made. I mean, there was a game where I know everyone on our board was upset about how many screens they were throwing. It was like, well, you could kind of understand why they were doing that, especially with how bad the receiver play was. Like, as frustrated, sometimes people get frustrated more with the end result than considering why Georgia was doing certain things. I mean, there have been games in the last 2 years where I thought he called a fantastic game, and he deserves some criticism, and I think that's totally fair. But it's for him to be the ultimate punching bag at Georgia. I think it's a little overblown, and I think it's good for him that they won this recruitment, because I have to imagine too. There was probably some negative recruitment when it came to Georgia, and then being like, well, look at this offense. Do you really want to go play for Mike Bobo? And Georgia withstood that. Mike Bobo withstood that, and that relationship and the connection he built with the Curtises was enough to land one of the top quarterbacks in the country.
I mean, think about what all they had to they had to navigate. The offense took a little bit of a downturn this season. They had to navigate their 2-year starting quarterback transfers to Miami after the season. They had to navigate false reports that Mike Bobo was going to be stepping down for health reasons and wasn't going to be the offensive coordinator. They had to navigate, really his right-hand man in the quarterback room, Montgomery Van Gorder, going to the NFL. Like, there were a lot of parts of this recruitment, even after he decommitted from Georgia, that were not in Georgia's favor. And I think it really did take, a recruiting masterclass from Mike Bobo. And when there are conversations about, he's past his prime, or, he doesn't have it anymore, he's not whatever criticisms that there might be about him, he went out and he won this recruitment for a guy that Georgia really felt like it needed to have. And I think that's sort of the last piece that I was going to talk about, was like, Georgia ended a little bit of a narrative here. Like, you think about, I guess you got to sign him before we can say that definitively.
Name one other time.
I guess, you think about the last few recruiting classes, Dylan Raiola, Arch Manning. Like, there are examples where Georgia kind of whiffed at quarterback. And I don't want to say whiffed in Raiola's class, because obviously Ryan Puglisi is very highly respected in Athens and was in that class as well. But still, losing out on a quarterback one type of guy at the end of the recruiting class, you miss out on Arch Manning. Like, I think despite having what I would consider 4 straight years of great quarterback play with Carson Beck and Stetson Bennett, there was this notion like Kirby Smart can't land his guy in recruiting. I feel like somehow there's still like Justin Fields, Jake Fromm ripple effects that have like not been able to go away, even though these guys were in elementary school when that quarterback conversation was going on. And so, good by Georgia to go get their guy, kind of eliminate that narrative, assuming that you end up signing him, which I fully expect to happen in December, and kind of for the time being put that notion to rest that Georgia can't just go out and get a quarterback. It's quite frankly, Mike Bobo has always really been able to go out and recruit the best quarterbacks. Like as long as he's been an offensive coordinator, he's done a great job of going out and getting his guys at quarterback. And so I think this is just another example of that. All-time move by Jared. I'll also say that he called Kirby Smart beforehand and kind of tried to prank him, letting him know that it was going to be Oregon. Ballsy move to try and pull that one, but I think that he'll appreciate that he did that in the long run. I think he probably is going to regret that he didn't try and stick the bit out a little bit longer than he did. But yeah, I mean, is there anything else you'd want to add about Jared just as a player or just your thoughts on this recruitment before we move on to Jordan?
Well, I think the biggest thing you hit on there was that Georgia got their guy, because let's say Jared Curtis goes to Oregon, they get Bo Bentley instead, a guy both of us like. There was always going to be that, yeah, but they struck out on Jared Curtis. Even if Bo comes to Georgia and winds up, being productive, it would have been, well, you didn't get the number one quarterback on your board. I really like Jared Curtis. I've wrote about this in the time since he committed. I'm someone that thinks that, the best situation for him is maybe to sit as a true freshman, because I think he's got the tools. I want to see, him get some time behind some experienced quarterbacks, get some time with Mike Bobo, because I think it's there. The big question I think we all have is just how he handles such a drastic step up in competition. But the more I've watched of Jared Curtis, the more I've liked him as a college prospect. Even if it does not happen in year one, I think Georgia fans should stay patient with him, because I think he's very talented. I do think he's capable of putting it all together.
No doubt. All right. So there was also good news on Sunday. 4-star safety Jordan Smith commits to Georgia over Tennessee, Georgia Tech, Florida State. I'll say it this way. I don't feel like he committed to Georgia over anyone, because this is one of those recruitments where I just feel like it was always going to be Georgia, and that's where he was going to commit. That's why if I remember correctly, when you picked him for your predicted commit team, I had like this visible deflation where I was like, how did I not have him on my list? How did I not include him earlier? Like I think I was sitting on my high horse after I had Graham Houston as my first pick. I kind of felt really that one was like a easy in the bag early, and then Zach Fort as the second one. I think I stopped, investing myself into my picks. But I think this is an underrated commitment, and I don't mean underrated in terms of his ranking. I mean, we have him as like the number 57 overall player in the country, but I mean underrated in terms of how big of a recruiting win this is. Like it kind of just happens on a Sunday night. And like, I don't think that many people knew that it was going to be happening. He sort of went live on his Instagram, had a little hat ceremony. He was surprising his mom for Mother's Day. And like, there were a few people that were aware of it, but it wasn't like a big brouhaha scheduled planned thing that was happening. And so, I don't think as much got talked about this edition, but this is a football player. Like, I know everyone wants to, we spent so much time on the bad. Now my brain is, warped by this, and I just want to, talk to all the haters. And I really don't even want to be talking to the haters anymore. I just want to be talking to the people that respect ball, because like I was over at Clark Central earlier this spring. I had, gone out to see Hezekiah before he enrolled at Georgia. And then I ended up going and seeing some of his teammates that are getting recruited over there. And Clark Central got bounced by Houston County in the playoffs last year. And I did not bring it up. They brought it up. They started talking about the kid down at Houston County. I was like, who are you talking about? They got a couple of dudes, and they were like, 4 on Houston County is that guy. Like, he is different than everybody else that they've seen at the high school level. And, when high school coaches and multiple of them start talking about guys like that, especially ones that had been their opponents when they could very easily have sour grapes or be spiteful, it makes me start to perk up a little bit. And that's when I started to realize at the beginning of the year, like Jordan Smith is the real deal in terms of how he's viewed as a target. I mean, this is a guy that plays wide receiver for them. He could probably play wide receiver at the next level. He's not going to do that. He's going to be playing safety at Georgia. Could play star. Quite frankly, could play corner just with his skill set. But I really do see this as the KJ Bolden, Malachi Starks, free roaming safety type that Georgia likes to add every couple of classes. He has the length. He has the athleticism. He's a low-key dude. Like, I remember earlier this spring when he was releasing his top 4 with his official visits, he just reached out to me on a random Wednesday and was like, hey, I'm trying to put out my official visits. I don't really know how I'm supposed what am I supposed to do? And he was just like, could you just make me something real quick? It's he's a no frills guy. He's like, I wanted people to know I have my official visits. I want coaches to be aware. But I think this was a dude who did not want to get into official visit season. This was a guy who wanted to commit to Georgia, who's going to take his official visit to Georgia. He was scheduled for May 30th to June 1st. I think there's a possibility that he could adjust that to June 13th to 15th, just because there's going to be a lot of other commits that are there that weekend that they might just want him to adjust there. But either way, I'm only expecting him to take one official visit, and that will be to Georgia. This is a safety, but I want to give credit to Dante Williams in this recruiting cycle as well, just because, he's played a key role in them getting Zach Fort at safety. He's played a key role in them getting Jordan Smith at safety, and he's going to do his part with some of these corners that they're going to add this summer. And I think that they're in a lot better position for some elite higher on the board targets than I've maybe realized. But he has also played an important role in safety recruiting. And obviously Travaris Robinson is going to be involved there as well. But, the more this cycle's gone on, the more I've been thinking of Dante Williams as a defensive back coach, as a recruiter, than just a cornerbacks coach. That might be where his focus is on the field. And I think they do some cross training as coaching and as players anyway at defensive back. But he's played a critical role in getting a lot of these DBs, and Jordan Smith is really just the latest one.
Yeah, 6'2", 185. One of the 40-yard dash times I saw was 4.39. I mean, free safety, I think, is a great fit there. And you hit on one of the biggest things I was going to say with him being underrated, and I think it's all about timing. His commitment comes a few days after Jared Curtis, and everybody's waiting on the Jackson Cantwell news. And it's like, hey, let's pay attention to this 4-star safety they just got. I really liked his film. I wrote up what I liked about him. And here's my thing, and I mentioned this in my write-up. Easter, Georgia adds 3 of the transfers. Mother's Day, Jordan Smith pops. I'm not saying anything's going to happen on Memorial Day. I don't have any intel. I'm just saying keep an eye out that Georgia seems to really enjoy making something out of these holidays.
Well, I'm going to be probably sipping some beverages on the beach, on the lake or something on Memorial Day. So if you're listening to this and you're planning on doing a holiday commitment and it happens to be Memorial Day, just let me know in advance so that I can make sure that I got everybody on our end ready to go and hype it up the way that it needs to be. I'm going to get Jordan on the show before the end of the summer. That's a promise that I'm going to make you. Calling your shot on a guest is probably ill-advised, but I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to call that one out right now. I will also say he has a teammate, Kayvon Conciaro, wide receiver down at Houston County as well. Big body, 6'4", 6'5", 210, 215 pounds, bigger dude. I think Georgia would like to add one of those types in this class. They're not a package deal by any means, but they are close friends. And I could see a world where both of those guys ended up in Georgia's class. And then the last commitment that Georgia's had since the last time that we did one of these, 3-star offensive guard Graham Houston. A little bit further removed from that one, and we've talked about it really at length on a previous Junkyard Dawgcast as well, so I don't need to get as much into the nitty-gritty and the details of it. What I will say is this is a dude that is higher on Georgia's interior offensive line board than he is in the 24/7 sports recruiting rankings. I'm not saying one is right versus the other. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be that way. I'm just saying that's the reality of it. I've spoken with multiple people that would know who view this guy as the best offensive guard in Georgia, and just based on their exposure to him and other offensive guards in Georgia, like their expertise with things, I really am inclined to believe them in terms of their eval. I've seen Graham Houston in person several times. In fact, I'll say last fall when I went to a Buford Thursday night game when they played Decula, I kind of was just wanting to swing by, see if there was anybody that popped out that I hadn't really seen. And I didn't know how in deep with Graham Houston Georgia was, but Graham Houston was playing left tackle for Buford that night, even though he's going to be an interior offensive lineman. I grabbed a bunch of photos of him that night because I was like, man, like I haven't talked to Graham a bunch. I haven't really followed what's going on in his recruitment a bunch. But when you follow Georgia recruiting enough, you start to get out to football fields and say, oh, that looks like a dude that would play for Georgia. Oh, he stands out compared to some of the other guys. Graham definitely fits into that category. I mean, when you're talking about height, weight, athleticism, mentality, he is the prototype for what Georgia looks for from its interior offensive lineman. And, you know, just like Jordan Smith, no frills. Like nobody really knew that it was going to be happening. It wasn't some big scheduled commitment. It was a, hey, Thursday night, kind of just want to get the news out there. I'm ready to commit to Georgia. I don't need to take official visits anywhere else. I did want to ask, though, Jordan, I mean, this is 2 Buford commits in 3 cycles. Like, is the curse dead? And how does a curse work? Like, if Bryce Perry Wright or Tyree Green or Nasir McCoy or some of these other Buford guys end up committing elsewhere, and, you know, out of that group, I think at least 2 of them will commit elsewhere. Like, does the curse come back, or is it dead forever? What do you know about that?
Well, I would go with the Billy Bob Thornton line that there ain't no curses, period. But I mean, the thing to me is once you broke through a KJ Bolden, I mean, the curse was dead. So I think you have to go 5 cycles with nobody from that school to say, okay, this is not happening anymore. But no, I think the curse, if you even believed there was a curse, it's dead and gone.
My big thing is don't undersell these recruiting wins. The Jordan Smiths, the Graham Houstons, like these are the cornerstones of Georgia's football program. Like these are the foundation for what Kirby Smart believes in. Like they want, you know, guys like Jordan Smith and guys like Graham Houston and how they operate and the talent levels that they have. And I know everyone wants to say it's the world is, you know, the college football world is ending as we know it. And, you know, they throw out the phrase NIL, even though they don't even understand how rev share works because they didn't watch our February episode where we talked about it in detail. You know, everyone wants to get mad without totally understanding how the new landscape is working. But just know Kirby Smart knows how the new landscape works. He doesn't need a general manager to be able to tell him how the new landscape works. Like they have a great operation in place. They know what limits they're willing to be able to go to. And they know the recruits that check the boxes from a physical standpoint that they also can be able to get, you know, more affordably than certain other guys and build in an entire roster the way that you want. So don't let some little bad news like Jackson Cantwell committing to Miami get in the way of a bunch of good news, Jared Curtis and Graham Houston and Jordan Smith committing to Georgia. We're going to take a quick ad break. Before we do that, I do highly recommend a Dogs 24/7 subscription. As always, you get a free Paramount Plus subscription to go along with it. You know, I know that there are people on days like yesterday when they're all fed up with recruiting and they're done with it all, they can still find solace in knowing that they can go have their Paramount Plus subscription as well. So definitely check us out there. There's going to be, you know, a ton of content there over the next 2 months as it relates to who's going to be playing football for Georgia in the future. So like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously subscribe if you follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. When we get back from this ad break, we will be talking about official visits coming up. We've got some arrow pointing up. And of course, we're going to have some fun with Predict a Commit as well. like I said, it is officially official visit season. It is recruiting season. Like, we have now reached the point, with the exception of Memorial Day, the next 5 weeks. So 5 out of the next 6 weeks, Georgia is going to be loaded with recruiting visitors. This weekend is no different. And they're going to have a bunch of official visitors, but I'm going to name a few that we've had reported for a while over at Dogs 24/7. And then, like I just did, I'm going to encourage everyone to go to Dogs 24/7 to check out, there are going to be some additional names that we add to this list, and we're going to sort of break down where everything stands with their recruitment. There's also going to be some unofficial visitors, and I'll get into that in a second, but we'll get, some unofficial visitors that are going to be on campus. But talking about some official visitors that really stand out to me that are going to be there for that, May 16th to May 18th weekend. I'll start at offensive tackle, just because, we've talked about Jackson Cantwell and where do you turn when you miss on him. Wilson Searer from Rabin Gap Nikuchi School in North Georgia, originally from Germany, the younger brother of Falcons practice squad offensive lineman, former Auburn offensive lineman. Killian Searer, he's going to be on his official visit to Georgia this weekend. I think that Georgia probably is running in the top 2 for him, and I'm interested to see whether or not Georgia revs things up for him now that they've missed on Jackson Cantwell. Like, when you talk about who does Georgia turn to now that they've missed on Cantwell, I think Wilson Searer is an option. I think that Jared Smith is definitely an option. And so this is a visit that I'm going to be following very closely. I think that Auburn has some built-in advantages because that's where his brother went, and he's visited there so many more times, just coming over there from Germany when he was in high school, or when he was, in middle school and high school over in Germany. But that's one that I think becomes more interesting now that Jackson Cantwell chose Miami. Talking about a guy that I still feel very strongly about Georgia landing, Ryan Mosley, wide receiver from Carrollton, Georgia. I have now officially placed a crystal ball pick in favor of Georgia for Ryan Mosley. He'll be in my future mock classes that are coming up. He's been in my past mock classes that I've had as well. Someone that I don't expect anything to happen from a news standpoint this weekend, because I think he is still going to want to take all of his official visits, but I'm expecting buzz to be positive for Georgia coming out of the official visit this weekend. Tyson Bacon. It's a name that we've brought up on this show in the past, because when you hear the name Tyson Bacon, how can you not bring up the name Tyson Bacon? But he decommitted from Tennessee earlier this spring. He's a defensive lineman that Georgia really, really likes. I always think it's hard to steal defensive linemen out of the state of Alabama if someone in the state of Alabama really wants them, but Georgia's definitely taking a shot there, and Trey Scott was over in Birmingham to see him earlier this year. A couple of other guys, Darius Gray, another guy, interior offensive lineman, I think could come into focus a little bit more if Georgia wants to load up on interior offensive line, if it doesn't think it's going to be able to make too many splashes at tackle. Nick Abrams is a name at linebacker from Maryland that I haven't talked about a whole lot, but the more linebacker conversation that happens, the more that I think Nick Abrams is a name that everybody in the Georgia world should need to know. And then cornerback Jalen Lott is a name that came up to me last week as someone that Georgia's maybe a little bit more involved with than I previously thought. He's going to be taking that official visit to Georgia this weekend as well. Is there anyone out of that group in particular, Jordan, that strikes you?
Interested by Tyson Bacon, just trying to figure out exactly where Georgia's going to go. And I think just generally sort of with this defensive line in 2026, trying to get a feel for who they're targeting, who they like, who they're in the mix for. That's the name that I miss. Maybe that's just because I'm hungry, but Tyson Bacon is what caught my attention.
No, I've said to Tyson, I'm like, if anybody's going to be able to get some Deloitte cleared NIL marketing deals, it is Mr. Tyson Bacon. It seems like there are some pretty easy built-in commercials and advertisements and billboards to be done wherever it is that he goes with Tyson Foods. I will say it's not just an official visit weekend. And like I said, expect more than just those names as official visitors. So subscribe to Dogs 24/7. There will also be unofficial visitors. This is scavenger hunt weekend. We write about this every single year. This is a weekend where Georgia likes to get some guys on campus that maybe haven't been on campus as much, that they want to build some closer relationships with those players and with their families. And a lot of times Georgia has success bringing players in from those into their recruiting class when they were at Scavenger Hunt weekend. So stay locked into Dogs 24/7 for what that full list of those names is going to be. If you're a 2026 recruit that's there, I become very intrigued. As an unofficial visitor, I get very intrigued about what that means. I mean, you look at last cycle, Rashawn Dinkins didn't have an official visit, or he didn't have an offer from Georgia when he came for Scavenger Hunt weekend. And I believe did not leave with an offer from Georgia after Scavenger Hunt weekend. I don't believe it was until Georgia lost Rashad Johnson, flipped to Texas A&M. That was when Georgia ended up offering Rashawn Dinkins. But there was clearly something built up there dating all the way back to that Scavenger Hunt weekend. And so any 2026s that are there are going to catch your attention. And quite frankly, any 2027s that are there are going to really catch your attention as well. All right, Jordan, arrow pointing up. I will let you begin.
I'm going to start arrow pointing up. Atlanta Falcons. They're making me believe. I want to shout out my buddy Parrish Walton on Twitter. I retweeted him today saying, no question about it, I'm ready to be hurt again. As we're recording this, we're getting ready for the NFL schedule release. But I did want to play this video. Shout out the Atlanta Falcons social team. They do a really good job with different content. They did a really cool video earlier this week with the rookies. And they had them pronounce towns in the state of Georgia. I'm going to play the video in a second. I'm going to read through the names of these cities for the people who aren't watching the video. It's Tequila, Dahlonega, Chickamauga, Tallapoosa, Tennille, and Athens were the cities they had. And here's the video of the rookies.
Walker, outside linebacker.
Jack Nelson, O-line.
James Pierce Jr., edge rusher.
Xavier Watts, safety.
Billy Bowman Jr., and I played defensive back.
Dakula.
Dacula.
Dakula.
Dacula. Dalahonga.
DeLonga.
Delanga. Delaga?
DeLonga.
Chickamauga.
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 Tallapoosa.
Tallapoosa.
Tepulisa?
Tallapoosa.
Tallapoosa.
Tennille. Tennille.
Tenau?
Tennille.
Athens.
Yeah, we cool on the last one. I'm going to let y'all figure out the last one by yourself.
James Pierce not wanting to say Athens there at the end. But I brought this one up, Ben, because I wanted to ask you a question of if there's a town in the time you've covered Georgia, going back to when you covered Auburn, that I'll start it, but that its pronunciation throws you for a loop. And I'll start. This is really two towns. But Lafayette. Growing up playing the college football game, I knew that as Lafayette from UL Lafayette. North Georgia, they say Lafayette. Out in Alabama, it's Lafette. So there's just all kinds of different pronunciations based on where you are. But that one's I was in Alabama long enough. When I read that, I just think Lafette, because shout out the Lafette Bulldogs.
Well, yeah, so Lafette would have been high on my list because I was covering Auburn recruiting when they signed Boobie Whitlow. He was out of Lafette. But I was in attendance for a couple Lynette versus Lafette football games, which you're not finding many more exciting small town high school football rivalries than Lynette versus Lafette. You're putting me on the spot, so nothing's coming to mind. So I'm glad you said Lafette because that one definitely stands out to me.
I'll throw some other ones. Cairo.
Yep.
Cairo is a good one. I'm trying to think of some other ones. I'd never really covered any people from any recruits in Alabama from Arab. That's a popular one.
Mm-hmm. Trying to think. I literally have pulled up a map here. This is excellent podcasting that's going on. I've pulled up a map here and I'm trying to think if there were any that have, that strike me, but Lafette is probably the number one on the list for me.
I'll shout out Lochapoka and Notasulga as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Was that your last one?
Got one other one, and this was kind of breaking on, let's see, I don't even know what day it is. Wednesday as we record this. Arrow pointing up, King of the Hill. King of the Hill is coming back later this summer on Hulu. I think Disney Plus too. Always loved King of the Hill. I don't know, Ben, if you ever watched King of the Hill very much. I was always a Dale Gribble fan. He was always my favorite.
I didn't really watch it. I mean, there's things I know, like, damn it, Bobby. Like there's things that I have picked up on because of being addicted to the internet. But no, I never really was a big King of the Hill guy.
You'll have to catch it when it comes back.
Yeah, I should. All right, arrow pointing up for me. I'll say we've talked about it a little bit already, but I'm just going to say arrow pointing up on 5 stars. As I said earlier, we have a philosophy, our scouting team, I should say, has a philosophy of they don't want to attach 5 stars to people too early in the process and then take away 5 stars when they were 15 years old when they got attached that 5-star and they just didn't necessarily become what everyone was expecting. I think last time when we first launched the 2026 class, there were 3 5-stars, and it was the guys that you just knew were going to stay 5 stars throughout the cycle. In the most recent, the previous release, there were only 12 5-stars, which caught a lot of flack in the Georgia world because Jared Curtis was number 13, which meant that he was the highest ranked 4-star, even though we all knew that he was going to end up being a 5-star. Well, we've officially expanded to that 32 5-stars in the most recent top 24/7 release. Jared Curtis is one of them, but I will say some guys that Georgia is recruiting heavily and that I do expect to visit Georgia this summer. Linebacker Tyler Atkinson has not released his official visit schedule yet, but I'm thinking that he will release his official visit schedule in the next week or so. Running back Savion Hyder is a name that I will keep mentioning around here until he commits to somewhere other than Georgia, because all of the conversations that I have around my sources lead me to believe that Georgia is much more in this recruitment for Savion Hyder than a lot of people have let on. Do I think that Ohio State and Michigan might be a little bit more entrenched in it? Yeah, I think that there's a chance that that's the case, but I think that Georgia and Tennessee are both in this recruitment more than people think, and he is universally seen as the number 1 linebacker in this class. That's by our scouts. That's by the people that I've talked to that work for scouting departments across the country as well. Safety Jara Edwards got his 5th star. This is a guy that has already taken official visit to Georgia for G-Day. I was talking with him last week. I think there's a chance he still takes an unofficial visit to Georgia at some point this summer. And if that happens, I think that is a really good sign for Georgia that he's working them into his calendar, even though he has already taken the official visit there. Another defensive back, Chauncey Kennan, is a cornerback from Booker in Sarasota, Florida. Interesting, I think. Chauncey Kennan will take an official visit to Georgia June 6th. His high school teammate, Ty Wortham, is a wide receiver who I've basically not written about at all. He also has an official visit scheduled that weekend. And Ty, I believe, is going to be at Scavenger Hunt this weekend as an unofficial visitor. So, sometimes you start piecing together guys that are friends or have been at places together, and then now all of a sudden there's mutual Georgia interest again. Not saying package deal, but saying just like when it's not that Justin Williams and Joseph Jonah Ajanye were a package deal, but the second both of them are making visits on different dates to come see Georgia, it makes you say, oh, maybe there's something there, and they've had some conversation about Georgia. And then, of course, new 5-star, number 31 overall player in the country, tight end Mark Bowman. Now that Jared Curtis's recruitment is over, now that Jackson Cantwell's recruitment is over, I've already mentioned Savion Hyder. I've already mentioned Tyler Atkinson. Those are guys that I think Georgia is going to get competitive for. Mark Bowman's probably next up on that list when you're just talking best player available, player that Georgia wants. Like Mark Bowman is probably right up there with Jared Curtis and Jackson Cantwell on this list. And he very well deserved got a 5th star. He would have been a no questions asked early 5-star had he stayed in the 2027 class. I think because he reclassified to 2026, he just had to fight certain narratives and things like that there are about reclassifications. But when it was all said and done, and when it's all said and done, he's going to be a surefire 5-star in the 24/7 sports rankings. Arrow also pointing up, and Jordan and I talked about that. I basically got confirmation from Jordan on this before I use this as a arrow pointing up on Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show episodes, because I sort of made the executive decision and then crossed it with Jordan to make sure that he would be cool with it. As our good friend UNLV head coach Dan Mullen would say, it is recruiting season. And so because of that, y'all deserve more than every other week recruiting shows. There's too much going on. Next week, we're going to be talking about things that happened with official visits this upcoming weekend. And then, after Memorial Day weekend, we're going to be previewing a really big May 30th official visit weekend. And then there are going to be every single week official visit weekends to react to and official visit weekends to preview. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of commitments that are going to be happening throughout June and then at the end of June and July. And so for at least until the end of June, we're going to be doing every week Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show episodes to be able to make sure that we are giving you, up-to-date, timely conversation around Georgia recruiting, because it really is getting to the busy time of year for that.
Don't ever say we don't ever do anything for y'all.
Yeah, exactly right. And don't say that I don't do anything for Jordan either and make him now do twice as many Stay Wolk recruiting episodes throughout the summer. All right. This is going to be a fun one because I'm going to have some fun with this one. We didn't have a guest on this show, so I was like, you know what? Let's give the people what they want. We're not just going to do one predict to commit, right? We gotta add some layers and some elements to this. So we're going to have some fun with this one. We're going to actually pick 2 predict to commits. And so let me do a quick refresher, because there have been some scoreboard changes, I would say, since the last time that we've done one of these. So Jordan, on your list of predict to commits, you have running back Derek Cooper, linebacker Tyler Atkinson, defensive lineman Carter Lucky, tight end Mark Bowman, defensive back Jordan Smith. And I will say, last time we were recording this, I got a text message in the middle of us talking about predict to commit, and I said, Jordan, there's someone on your team that I just got a text about that I think you should feel really good about that ending up. I will let the people know now. I gave that tease then. That was about Jordan Smith. So congratulations to you finally getting on the board. You got on the board with more than just Jordan Smith. He wasn't even your first on the board, but he was your first prediction that you made that has resulted in a win. So congratulations there. Offensive lineman Jared Smith, who, again, I like where you're at there. Outside linebacker Kamari Brooks, I like where you're at there. Quarterback Jared Curtis. That was probably the savviest move you made, because now I can't pick a quarterback. Like, I'm just not going to have a quarterback on my team at any point. So excellent move by you there. Defensive lineman PJ Dean, wide receiver Craig Dandridge, and then last episode, defensive lineman James Johnson. Do you have anything to say for your correct predictions?
We're just getting started over here at Team
right.
Jordan.
That's right. Job's not finished. All right. And then on my team, I have Graham Houston, Zach Fort. Those were my first 2. So I am going to, as bad as things could get for me the rest of the summer, I'm just always going to say, when we started this exercise, my first 2, I absolutely nailed them, and I felt good about them from start to finish. Also have Jay Lamar, running back Jay Lamar, offensive lineman Malcolm Gaston, defensive back Tyreek Green, offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell. So that is the first misfire from either side so far. So you've got 2 correct. I've got 2 correct. I've got 1 incorrect. I think that you're sitting pretty leaving this episode today, Jordan. Wide receiver Ryan Mosley, offensive lineman Ekene Boko, offensive lineman Brett Koleje, defensive lineman Ernest Rankins, and then defensive back Peyton Dyer, who I picked last episode. We're going to pick 2 apiece. We're going to do snake style. Do you want to go 1 and 4, or do you want to go 2 and 3? I'll let you make that pick.
I think I want to go 1 and 4.
All right.
And see sort of how the board plays out.
All right, let's see it. Hit me with your number 1.
So we're getting at the point with these where there's not the slam dunks like Ben said earlier. With his first picks, it was guys that, as Ben's the recruiting reporter, he felt pretty good about, and they both panned out. And some of my early picks, I was like, okay, I like these. Now we're kind of getting to the point where maybe it's a stretch, and they're definitely not slam dunk sure things, but This was a guy when we were going over. When I was reading through before this episode, I was like, neither one of us have picked this guy. So I'm going to take him off the board, and I'm going to go Caden Prothro. I'm going to pick Caden for my class. I'm a little bit hesitant because I've already got Mark Bowman, but you've done a great job of reporting on his recruitment and saying, look, Georgia doesn't necessarily just look at him as a tight end. They look at him as an offensive weapon. Being able to line him out wide, also involve him at tight end. And the thing, too, that I look at with Caden Prothro, 6'6", 210 out of Bowden, Georgia, that Georgia does such a effective job of being able to recruit tight end. Because I look at tight end and inside linebacker every single year, and I go, well, they can't possibly sign multiple guys at this, but look what they just signed in 2025. But they do it over and over. And this is one that I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, it's just a matter of time before he commits. But just knowing Todd Hartley, knowing how they recruit the position, and knowing, they've got Mark Bowman, they've already got Lincoln Keys, I still see a world where they can make Caden Prothro happen, give him very creative ways to be involved in the Georgia offense. It won't be easy, but I'm throwing Caden Prothro on my team.
I think it's a great pick for a few reasons. One, there is a world where Georgia's only able to sign Mark Bowman or Caden Prothro, not Mark Bowman and Caden Prothro. But I think sitting right here, right now, it's a pretty safe bet that they get at least one of those two guys. And so I think it's a good security blanket for your Bowman pick. I think also you've sort of squeezed me out of predicting a tight end now at this point because we've had Lincoln Keys on the show before. Georgia loves that dude. I think that he is going to rise up rankings as it gets further into the year as well. Georgia, really wants to hold on to him. They obviously are going to go all in for Mark Bowman. And if they were to take three, those would be the three: Keys, Prothro, and Bowman. So again, I can't really make a tight end pick. I think that, Matt Ludwig is a tight end that Georgia likes a lot that's going to take an official visit this summer. I don't love Georgia's chances of getting him at this point, but I guess maybe there's a chance that we're doing like a June 5th episode or a June 10th episode, and I'm picking Matt Ludwig to maybe try and okie dokie at tight end. But I think that that's a super savvy pick, and he just has a lot of UGA traits that make a lot of sense, right? Like, he's won 3 state championships. He is a freakish athlete. He plays baseball. He plays basketball. He plays football. I think Georgia's thinking almost as an offensive weapon more so than a tight end. And so for that, I think even if Georgia does get Mark Bowman and does get Lincoln Keys, there's still a world where they could add Caden Prothro and you'd be able to land on both Bowman and Prothro. All right. I like that you gave me 2-3 because I wasn't going to take Caden, even though, again, you've done a great job this whole year I point to Jordan Smith, Jared Smith, especially now. Kamari Brooks is definitely one where I didn't necessarily have them on my list that day. And I'm like, I thought you do this, Ben. Like, I thought you were a recruiting guy. What are you doing? And when you brought him up, I've said, man, that was a really good pick. And so Caden's definitely another one of those. I'm going to talk about a guy that has come up to me more recently that I think, we've known Georgia was in it, but I think I'm starting to understand how much Georgia values him as a prospect. And it's a name that everybody is familiar with. And it is the younger brother of Minkah Fitzpatrick, Justice Fitzpatrick. He's going to take an official visit to Georgia at the beginning of June. Interestingly, I know people are maybe a little bit war-torn after the Jackson Cantwell recruitment, but it's one that I think will come down to Georgia and Miami. And the reason that I think that is because go look at Minkah Fitzpatrick's recruitment and who was involved in that recruitment on the staff at Alabama when Minkah Fitzpatrick committed to Alabama. It was Kirby Smart and it was Mario Cristobal. You go look at Minkah Fitzpatrick's profile to this day, the primary and secondary recruiters on his profile page are Mario Cristobal and Kirby Smart. And so I think this is poised to be a Kirby Smart versus Mario Cristobal recruitment because of those relationships. I know everybody listening to this is going to say, if Miami wants to throw him a bag, there's nothing that Georgia can do. Look, if people are operating under this house settlement salary cap world the way they think we think that they are, there's only so many bags to go around. You can't throw a bag at everybody. I think Georgia is going to value this guy highly, and this is a cornerback that I have now, when Georgia lost out on Jontavius Wyman and he flipped to Miami, the feedback that I got was, I think, Georgia could be potentially in a better place in the future because of it. I think they're in position for some elite guys that they could potentially land. I think Justice Fitzpatrick is a name that I have not written about nearly enough this cycle. And I don't want to fully tease my mock class, but why not? I might as well tease my mock class. I'm putting him in a predicted commit. Actually, in fact, let me say this. If you're listening to this now, you've maybe already read my mock class. But if you haven't already read my mock class, go read my mock class, and you'll also see that Justice Fitzpatrick, spoiler alert, is going to be in that.
What a tease. And cornerback is now, with what they've added at safety, just very fascinating to see where Georgia goes. And look, I know better than to put a lot of stock in this, but it seems like if there was a guy who doesn't necessarily have to get a bag to go pick a college, it'd probably be Minka Fitzpatrick's little brother. But I mean, maybe that's reading too much into it, but I like the pick.
No, I think you're probably right about that. All right. And then with my second pick, I'm going to put you to the test in terms of spelling, because this is a heck of a spelling of, and I might be butchering the first name. So I apologize. I'm actually getting out to see this guy next week, but it's someone that I have when I was making my spring schedule of what high schools am I going to be hitting to this spring. It was, I wanted to sort of cross check with some intel, like, where should I be going? Where should I not be going? What do I need to add? What do I need to remove? And this guy's name came up as someone where I absolutely needed to go out to see him. And that alone was an alarm bell that went off for me of, Georgia's way more in it with this guy than I realized. And his name is Whitley Caddo, Wihtelley. It's very possible that it's not Whitley. It could be Whitelli. I'll confirm that with him, and I'll get that situated after, when I meet him next week. This is a guy that has developed his body over the last 6 months. And I think that because of that, when Georgia got out to schools in the spring, or in the winter, I guess, Georgia's going by all these various schools, and sometimes they go by a school and you're like, I don't even know that is there a major recruit that's up at that school? I'm not that familiar with them. The reason Georgia wants to get there is because a guy like this might be listed at 6'2", 270, and then they get to the school and it's like, oh wait, no, this guy's 6'5", 295, and I'm looking at his arms and he's going to be able to build on that frame. And I think that's what happened here in this recruitment. I think that Georgia got out to see him. They realized, there is a dude that looks like a Georgia defensive lineman right there in Atlanta, and Georgia's going to turn up the heat on him. Now, I want to issue a caveat. I do not think that this is a lock for him to end up at Georgia. This is not I've got when I picked Graham Houston, I'll just say it. I knew Georgia was going to get Graham Houston, and I knew it was only a matter of time. And I was, sort of plugging that ahead of time so I could pat myself on the back in the future. This is not one of those selections. I think Georgia's way more interested here than I realized. And because of that, I've been trying to piece together who is Georgia going to add on the defensive line. You got to figure out certain guys that you're going to be able to add on a budget. And I think that this is a guy that fits in to that category just because of what his recruiting profile has been and because he hasn't blown up getting a bunch of offers from other places. But Whitley Caddo is someone that I am putting my stamp on that I think is Georgia material.
I don't know if you feel this way, Ben, but a recruit like him, one, I'll be honest, I don't really know a ton about him, but I always kind of pull for the guys who kind of seem like they come out of nowhere as far as landing on a Georgia radar, like Dennis last year. Yep. Just seeing a guy that, you always kind of think, at least in the time I've followed along with recruiting, it's like your junior years when things really start to pick up. And it's kind of by your senior year, the clock's ticking on if you're going to get some major offers. So I'm always going to be rooting for those kind of kids that it might be a little bit later, but that doesn't necessarily say anything about the player they could be. and maybe they can get there and make a lot of noise.
And I'll say this too. We talk a lot about salary cap and the new revenue share world that we're operating in. Kip Adams actually made this comment to me, like, are we going to get into a world where coaches no longer want their recruits to be highly rated? They want them to be lower rated, sort of diamond in the rough types, so that their price tag doesn't get driven up because they become mega recruits with mega agents. Like, if you want to avoid that, you almost want these hidden recruitments out there. And, I've had it brought up more than just with Cato. I've had it brought up with some other players around the state that we've talked about. Terrius Favors was one, Dallas Dickerson over at North Oconee, who Georgia hasn't offered yet. But like, there are certain guys that I think, and this doesn't just happen in Georgia. Like, I'm sure Alabama and Auburn do the same thing with guys from the state of Alabama. You figure out who your hidden gems are, and you try and keep them hidden from everybody else, because it becomes, easier for you to compile or put together a roster when you have guys like this. And so I definitely think this is an example of someone too, where when you see him, and if you just eliminate stars and you eliminate what you know about everything about every recruit, and you just see the player and you see the prospect and the wingspan and the dimensions and everything, you're like, oh, that guy seems like a Georgia guy. And I think that's kind of what happened there. All right, who's your last one, Jordan?
Ben, I think you had to know when you made this move a few episodes ago that it would come back, and that I would have to circle back. But I have to go with a guy that you dropped.
Yeah.
I'm picking up Desmond Green, interior offensive lineman. I just think we're in a very interesting spot. I think specifically when you look at Desmond Green and you look at Malcolm Gadsden, what's going to happen there, who winds up at Georgia. To me, it just sort of feels like it's one or the other. So it's sort of hedging my bets. It seems like Clemson and South Carolina, I think, have been recruiting Desmond Green really hard. But yeah, it's kind of like a game of chicken between me and you now. I think we're getting one of those two guys as an interior offensive lineman. And again, I mean, as soon as you dropped him, it's like, okay, it's probably a matter of time. I'm going to have to make Ben pay for this one.
Yeah, Big Dez, I think it's a good pick. I know he was interacting and engaging with many of the Jared Curtis news items that we were posting from the Dogs 24/7 account and my personal account as well. So he is clearly paying attention to things that are happening in the Georgia recruiting world. Someone that's been in my mock classes in the past. I like the pick. I'll say this too, in the Gaston and Green conversation, but also just other position groups too. Georgia is going to have its first elite summer camp on June 1st. And I think that for guys that Georgia's maybe still trying to figure things out with, or roster spots are getting tight, or they're trying to distinguish, all right, hey, there's 6 guys that we really like for 3 spots. How are we going to differentiate between them? I think that July 1st summer camp is a great opportunity, or not July 1st, I apologize. June 1st summer camp is a great opportunity for those guys to prove to the Georgia staff one final time against some other elite competition that, hey, I'm a great fit to be at Georgia. I'm interested to see how it plays out with certain other interior offensive linemen, because, with the Cantwell news happening, a lot of the focus is going to be at tackle, but you talk about the interior offensive line, Cantwell, Gaston, Desmond Green, Brett Collegier, Graham Houston, Zakai Helton, Ekene Boko is a guy that could play on the interior. Some other guys that we might still talk about here on this episode potentially could play on the interior. And so because of that, I'm as fascinated by interior offensive line recruiting for the rest of this cycle in terms of how it shakes out as I am who Georgia pivots to at tackle, which will be very important too, but I think that'll be a little bit more cut and dry. All right. I'm not letting us get out of here that easy, Jordan. I'm just not. I don't know if you have the DJ or air horn sound effect that you could do over this, but I'm throwing you a little bit of a curveball. We've been doing predict or commit for all of these episodes, and we're going to continue to be doing it. I might even rev it up where we do 2 an episode just so things get a little bit more exciting. But I think we have a tendency sometimes to try and go for the uncommitted guys because they've already proven or, guys that have committed have proven that they might be willing to go somewhere else. So we're throwing a wrinkle in it today. This is a little, it's still predict a commit segment, but it's like a, offshoot of the predict a commit segment. It is flip a commit segment. And so because of that, we are both going to predict one person that we think will flip to Georgia by the end of the summer. And because I'm just spawning this on you right here at the end of the episode, I'll let you pick first. And I'll say this too, I might have us do this again, which is really risky business because the chances of Georgia flipping like 4 guys this summer is not that likely. The chances of Georgia flipping 1 or 2 guys could definitely happen. But if I have us do this for 3 episodes and we both have 3 guys that we think Georgia's going to flip, we're going to have a chance of looking really stupid by the end of the summer, which is the whole purpose of it to begin with. So I'll let you begin.
First, you make us do the 2 pick-a-commits. I'm pretty sure if we do this every episode, we're going to have like 60 people in Georgia's class. I do like the flip-a-commit, and I'm just going to get nuts. You want to get nuts, Ben?
I want to get nuts, yeah.
Let's get crazy. My flip-a-commit is going to be Isaiah Williams, a linebacker from Tavares, Florida. I don't know if folks have followed this recruitment, but it's been all over the place. He's committed to Ole Miss now. Ben, you may know off the top of your head, where else has he been committed to this point in his
Oh, goodness gracious. He was committed to Florida State. He was committed to Florida. I want to say that he might have been committed to somewhere before Florida State even, and I'm blanking on where that might have been. But yeah, it's definitely been one of those recruitments.
I'm very fascinated. He's one of the highest rated inside linebackers in the 2026 cycle. And Andrew Ivins compares him to Smile Munden. That's awfully interesting. I'm really fascinated with inside linebacker in this class. To just kind of come out and say, Ben, one, I don't know what 2 inside linebackers Georgia's going to sign in this class. And I don't know if they're getting Tyler Atkinson. I just, based on what we've heard at this point, I don't think that's a lock. Now, again, Tyler's a guy that I have in my predicted commit, but I just look at this Isaiah Williams recruitment and say, I don't know that he's quite decided on Ole Miss because we've seen him flip a few times. I'm watching Georgia. He's going to be my flip a commit.
Well, that's an interesting one to me, too. And if you remember correctly, Isaiah Williams was in my first mock class of the year, my mock class 1.0. He was in there. And then I think committed to Florida like 3 days after that mock class. So it was the classic, what were you even thinking having him in the mock class? But, as the year goes on and recruitments unfold, I think, the layers get pulled back and you start to realize like, oh, maybe there was a little bit more Georgia interest there. Maybe there's a reason why Glenn Schumann keeps going down there. He visited for games last fall. I'm with you. I don't think that this one is over. I think that one could definitely still get interesting. I would not be shocked whatsoever if he holds on to that Georgia official visit that he has scheduled for this summer. And it would not surprise me if he ends up in a Georgia mock class again for me in the future. I'll say this. I made a list of like 10 guys that I feel like Georgia could potentially flip at this juncture. And he was certainly on that list. So I think it's a great pick. I hinted at, and you made it tough on me. We're going to have to do this again because there were the 2 guys that I wanted to have here on this. Neither of them were Isaiah Williams. And now it's like, I feel like we got to do this segment again and see whether you steal my guy or not, and then how it happens. But I wrote about him last night at Dogs 24/7 or on Tuesday night at Dogs 24/7. He's committed to Alabama, and it is Alabama offensive line commit Chris Booker. He's from Hapeville Charter, which is where Chris Smith went. And so Georgia certainly has familiarity recruiting that school. He was another one when, I told the story earlier about when I'm trying to figure out where I'm going this spring and I'm trying to get guidance on don't spend too much time here, or maybe you need to spend more time there. Chris Booker's name was one that came up as someone that I needed to, further investigate and do my due diligence on and make sure that I was building a relationship there to be able to cover his recruitment the right way, because it's something that's going to come into focus for Georgia. As I reported on Tuesday night, he's going to be taking that official visit to Georgia the weekend of June 20th to 22nd. In talking with Chris Booker, I do believe that Alabama has a firm footing in this recruitment. So again, not a situation of he's about to flip, but he got that offer from Alabama and didn't have many big time offers. He committed to Alabama, I think within like 48 hours. I might be a little bit off on that timeline after receiving that Alabama visit or that Alabama offer. And he even said that, his coach has told him, like, go with the people that love you first. Like, that should mean something. And I definitely think that it does. He acknowledged that Georgia apologizes to him for being late when they've had conversations with him. What I think is interesting about him, he's listed as an interior offensive line recruit. He has been recruited as an offensive guard by Alabama, and I do think that he will play offensive guard at the next level. But I think he has grown and developed in a way over the last 6 months, and he has the length there where there's some consideration about whether or not this is a guy that could play tackle at the next level. Again, I'm viewing him as an interior offensive line target, but I do think that there are some tackle qualities there. But for now, I don't think it's a sure thing or anything like that, but I do think if there's a world where Chris Booker, Alabama commit, is future Georgia commit, I think it exists.
Yeah, Chris Booker was my other option for the flip a commit, but I chose Team Chaos. So I feel great about the decision. I really like the flip a commit. I think it's a lot harder than the pick a commit, just because, just very simply, these guys have pledged to other schools. So you're trying to read between the lines who Georgia still thinks they have a good shot at and who could be flipped. And the thing that I like about Chris Booker, now, again, this was kind of more so in the aftermath of Nick Saban retiring, but you think about Mason Short, think about Desmond Glover, or Dontrell Glover, rather, two guys that were committed to Alabama to play offensive line and are getting ready to play for the Bulldogs.
No doubt. I will also say on Isaiah Williams, like, if you create in a lab, what does Glenn Schumann love at linebacker? Like Isaiah Williams, you remember how much Georgia fell in love with Raylan Wilson a few cycles ago? Like, this is kind of a reincarnation of that in terms of size and speed combo. Like, Isaiah Williams really is that. So that was the primary reason why he was in my mock class 1.0. And I think that as the cycle has gone on, the reason Glenn Schumann hasn't given up in that recruitment, one, it's probably not a recruitment that's over. And two, he's just someone that is what Georgia looks for at linebacker. All right. Like I said earlier, if you're listening to this, you've probably potentially already checked out my mock class 3.0. If you haven't, go subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We don't claim to bat 1,000 on our mock classes, but I will say Graham Houston, Jordan Smith, they have both, they were in original mock classes. They were in every mock class. If you read the text within it and don't just skim through it, you'll also understand some of the nuance that goes into it. And they were both very confidently predicted as being part of the mock class. So just know there's some juice and goods in there. I definitely encourage you to check that out. As always, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching there. Leave us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Feel free to be as mean to us in the comments as you want. Just leave us a 5-star review. That's really all I've got. Jordan, is there anything you wanted to get off your chest or anything that you wanted to get off my chest before we called it a day?
I would say it didn't make my arrow pointing up, but Atlanta Braves are 500 as we record this. It was a long overdue, but we finally saw it happen.
That's actually a good thing. You've been, what did it get to? 41 straight days that you were tweeting about the Braves getting back to 500?
Yep. They were 0-7 when it started, and now they're 21-21 as we record this.
That's like I said yesterday, they're 7 games above 500 since the 8th game of the year. How does it work? If they lose today, do you go back to doing it, or do you feel like a burden has been lifted off of you, that you have like one less daily responsibility of having to remember or get to the point where you're having to find random Braves players to be able to even tweet out?
Some people were like, you're going to have to automate this. I think we were probably a week away from starting to be like, oh, okay, we're going to have to really get creative with this. So I think it ended at just about the right time.
Who was your favorite of all 41? Who is your favorite random Brave drop?
The one I really like is Ted Turner as the manager. I don't know if you know the history behind that. He managed for a game, and then the MLB was like, you can't do that. So I like throwing that in there. And then I had to end with a World Series gift because that felt like the only way to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that was something that I obviously was enjoying. I managed to steal your bit and try and make my own bit out of it in classic Ben fashion. But
did you have a favorite along the way?
Did you have Saltalamacchia at one point? I can't remember.
I believe so.
I think anytime I see Saltalamacchia, I get fired up just because it's, name on the back of the jersey, fun name to say. Also, I always just had I think you and I both sort of had this like fascination for random Braves catchers through the years. So I think that was probably my favorite, but just because once I saw it, I just said Saltalamacchia 100 times throughout the day.
Boston Red Sox legend.
Exactly right. All right. Well, that's all we've got. Like I said, we will be back next week to debrief on the May 16th to May 18th official visit weekend, the scavenger hunt weekend. Well, I expect to have a guest next weekend as well. So we'll talk a little bit about who knows what with them. And then we'll start looking ahead to all of the subsequent official visit weekends as well. But with that, I'm your host, Ben Wolk, for Jordan Hill.